Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the motion to recommit that I'm offering today is a very simple one. The motion to recommit inserts language into this bill that blames Venezuela's economic, humanitarian, security, and refugee crisis squarely where it belongs, on socialism. This crisis is directly the result of years of socialist policies implemented by the authoritarian regimes of Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro. Venezuela should be the wealthiest country in South America, and indeed it once was. However, like all socialist regimes, Chavez and Maduro ripped power from the hands of their people, depriving Venezuelans of their personal liberties and relegating them to poverty, death, and despair. In socialist countries, the government no longer serves the people serve the government. Venezuela is currently experiencing, according to the New York Times, the worst economic collapse outside of war in the last half-century. The country's economy has shrunk twice as much as the Soviet bloc's economy did during their collapse. Venezuelans continue to suffer from shortages of food, medicine, and simple commodities. Inflation is set to reach 10 million% this year. 10 million% inflation. Mr. Speaker, that's unthinkable. Venezuela's economy is so bad, their inflation is so out of control, that according to Bloomberg, a haircut costs 5 bananas and 2 eggs. It's absolutely ridiculous. This is what it's come to in Venezuela. 1/10 of the population, 1/10, has fled the country due to economic collapse and government repression. As Margaret Thatcher once said, the problem with socialism is that eventually you run out of other people's money. Mr. Speaker, earlier this year, I was fortunate enough to get to the border of Colombia and Venezuela. In fact, I was with a bipartisan, bicameral delegation to the border. I talked to refugees about the conditions from which they fled. I heard stories of physicians who were performing surgeries with smartphone lights because the lights in the operating room went off and on. I heard stories from family members who said that people were dying, their other family members, because they couldn't get penicillin for simple wounds and infections. I saw a woman crossing a river in a wheelchair because she was so desperately seeking medical attention. It was truly heartbreaking. To this day, over 3 million Venezuelans have fled for Colombia, while the ruthless Maduro regime blocks humanitarian aid into Venezuela. Yet, Mr. Speaker, sadly, members of this very body continue to stand with Maduro.
The House will be in order.
Mr. Speaker, while members of this very body stand with Maduro, they simultaneously refuse to recognize Guaido as the legitimate president of Venezuela. They continue to blame the United States for Venezuela's collapse. They align themselves with the disastrous, inhumane policies of socialism. I urge my colleagues to call the crisis in Venezuela for what it is, the result of unfettered socialism. And I ask that they support this motion to recommit, which won't kill the bill, which won't delay its adoption. We must send a strong message. We must send a united message. We must send a message to the world that the United States is a beacon of freedom and hope, that the United States will always fight oppression, and that the United States will always empower the people. I yield.